Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should.
We are here at the Summer NAMM show with my guest, Mr. Craig Anderton.
Hi, Damien.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Your career is probably the epitome of all over the bleeping map. And,
Yeah.
that's, for me, a lot of the basis of why I do this show is because for years now, every time I've done something like a Tech Tracks panel at NAMM, students come up to me afterwards and they say things like, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. You could make money with that, And the conversation that I've had with a number of people is, when you're young, you have a goal in mind. You have, I'm going to be a whatever it is. And ultimately, it ends up, we make plans and the universe laughs, You have these goals, but all these other things happen along the way. And you definitely have illustrated that with your career. You've done so many different things. And I kind of want to get into a lot of that with you, of the stuff you've done and how that, not only how it happened, because I'm sure that there was a lot of really weird serendipity in a lot of it.
It was all.
Yeah, of course, as it is. But also how one thing kind of feeds the other. Tell me where your original starting point was. Was it music? Was it technology?
No, it was, well, actually, I saw a Segovia concert when I was a kid, and I said, I want to be able to do that.
Wow.
I just loved that sound. I loved what he was doing. I flipped out and it's like, I got to be able to do that. And what's really interesting is that fast forward 40 years later, whatever, and I was playing with the Variacs, doing weird echo things and stuff in the studio, and my daughter knocked on the door and said it was time for dinner, and she walked in and her jaw dropped and she said, I want to be able to sound like that. It was just such a looping thing, you know? But anyway, so I fell in love with the guitar. I thought guitars were really cool. And I was, I guess, nine years old. And for my 10th birthday, my mother and father got me a learner's guitar, and my grandmother got me a Remco radio kit. And the die was cast.
Oh, so left brain and right brain together.
Yeah, it was.
Oh my gosh, we have to not only learn how to play this thing, but how to record it too.
Well, and then when I was 12, I played professionally for the first time in a band, and I really liked that. I liked going on a stage and playing with people and having an audience, and to me, I realized that music was a language. You could converse with people that way. So I pursued music for quite some time. Well,
especially, you mentioned a band, because there you also have the interplay of different musicians and playing off of each other. And that dialogue right there is, that's what sucked me in. And not just necessarily learning to play the instrument yourself, but those moments when you lock with someone else musically.
Yeah, that's why you do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise you can just sit in your bedroom and play. But live. At my seminars, I often ask, if you could only play live or only be in the studio for the rest of your life, which would you choose? I would take live.
No question. Yeah.
Absolutely take live. But anyway, so I played in high school bands and all that stuff regularly, and then I went off to college, and I was at the University of Pennsylvania, and I was supplementing my tuition and stuff by playing. And so when I was going to be a sophomore, I said, look, I really need an off-campus apartment. I remember this was 1967, right? So the world was different then. And I said, I need a place to put my instruments and stuff. And they said, well, you can't do that. You're a sophomore. You can't do that till you're a junior. And then I went to the electrical engineering people who I was majoring in. I said, I want to take a minor in music. And they said, well, you can't do that. You can't take music in electrical engineering. So I was like, okay, well, I'm not coming back. So I didn't come back, and I got a gig as a house band at a place called The Trauma, which was one of those psychedelic club type places in Philadelphia. And it was a 6 nights a week, kind of thing. And the band did really well. We put out 3 albums. We toured all over the place, sold a lot of records. and it was a really nice run. But then I realized that there was certain baggage of playing live and all that was like, you know, I was just famous enough to know I didn't want to be more famous. You know what I mean?
Actually, that's an interesting thing, because we've both worked in the studio with famous people, and to be honest, I think the more I saw of that, the less I wanted it. You know, because yeah, you want to live a normal life too. You want to be able to go to the supermarket and, you know, not have photographers following you and whatnot.
Well, and it wasn't even just that. It was also that, you know, you had to top yourself, and you had to like, you know, I mean, there was just a lot of pressure. So it kind of took the fun out of playing, you know. But from there, I segued into production and session work. I did a lot of session work in New York. And I worked with, I've worked with a lot of really great engineers and producers.
I'm sure you
know,
have.
people worked with The Who and the Kinks and Springsteen and Astrid Gilberto. And I mean, you know, you can just talking heads, you can go right down the line. So I learned so much from those people. I mean, you know, I got to watch Jimi Hendrix mix, you know? And so when things like that happen in your life and you absorb it, that beats any school. I joke with people. I said I had to leave college so I could get an education.
Well, and that's one of the conversations I have with a lot of people now too, because you can learn a lot of stuff in recording school now that you couldn't when we were coming up, but you don't have now, or very few people have now, the opportunity to watch those things go on in the studio. And the stuff you learn there, the psychology aspects of it and all that, you know, that is in many, many ways more impactful on the creative process than what compressor you've chosen or what microphone.
Well, the problem that I see with a lot of education is that it tries to answer the question, how do I? It's up to you to answer the question, what if? What if will produce something that hasn't happened before? How do I will simply reproduce something that already happened. Like George Martin didn't go on the internet and typed in the search box of YouTube, how do I integrate strings with a quartet that mostly played clubs in Germany? You know? Instead it was, what if I integrated strings with a, you know, and if you look back at some of those classic records, they were all the results of what ifs.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And so like
really
when
true.
I see people saying like, oh, how do I master for a loud sound? How do I get a drum sound like John Bonham? John Bonham already did it.
Right. What microphones did you use on this session?
Yeah.
Because I want to use those. You're still not going to capture that magic.
Well, I was doing a really good example of that. I was working on a project. This was in the 80s. I had like a string of new age production hits in the 80s. They didn't know how to do rock and roll techniques, you know, so in the land of the blind, the one-eyed is king, and I knew stuff, you know. So on one session, I was doing equalization, and the artist was like writing down the settings. I said, why are you doing that? And he said, well, I want to be able to get those sounds next time. I said, but it'll be a different song next time. It'll be a different instrument. It'll be a different production. I said, you have to learn what an equalizer does, and then you can make it do whatever you want, you know. So I think that's, I'm sort of on this like what if crusade these days.
It's really true, and that's a really good way of putting it, because the innovation can come from anything. And you know, that's another conversation that I've had many, many times with people. When you talk about the evolution of technology, you know, I started out with a 4-track, a TAC reel-to-reel, and a monophonic synthesizer, a Sequential Circuits Pro 1, you know, and very, very little actual gear. And I had to learn how to make those things do a lot more than they could do normally. Same thing when you talk about, you know, George Martin and all of the guys at EMI. Let's figure out how to make these 4 tracks work to record this symphonic epic, or how about a lot of them?
What if we bounce to this and then
exactly,
we think it,
Exactly. And I think to a certain extent now we almost have a paralysis of too much technology. You know, you've got as many tracks as you need. That doesn't mean you're going to fill them up and it's going to be a better song.
I really don't agree that we have too much stuff, because here's the thing. Like every week I write a tip for the PreSonus blog on a Studio One thing. And every week I have no idea what I'm going to write, but then I ask a bunch of what ifs. And I'll go through 3 or 4 what ifs that well, what if I try this? And it's like, well, that sucks. But I'll go through them, and eventually I'll come up with something interesting. Like, what if I take 2 reverbs and throw one out of phase? Well, they cancel. But if I increase the delay time on one of them, they become less and less similar as the decay happens, and so it blooms, you know?
It's kind of cool.
Could I have done that with a chamber, with a physical chamber? No. I mean, you know, so I think that it's all there. You know, it's like you have this incredible smorgasbord of stuff. And these, I mean, I try to limit the number of tracks. And it's not a desire to be vintage or, you know, precious or anything, but it's just because it's easier to mix. It's easier to mix 2 tracks than 200 tracks.
It's the truth, yeah.
And so if I can get something done in 4 tracks or 8 tracks, you know, great. The other thing is that I've really applied a lot of DJ thinking to music, because I'm really, you know, I've done the DJ thing and the EDM thing over in Europe and all that. And, you know, people who think that they're just button pushers have never seen a really good DJ in action, because the way they drop things out and put things back in again. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the mute switch.
Well, you're deconstructing the mix at that point.
And you're saying, do I really need the bass here? Well, I don't. And when it comes back in, it has all this incredible impact, you know, because all of a sudden it's come back in.
Well, I'm a bass player, so that to me is, you know, that's the magic of the bass. People don't notice it unless it's not there.
Well, the other magic of the bass is it's part of the rhythm section.
It is. It's actually the bridge. I feel that it's the bridge between the rhythm element and the melody.
This is why guitar players can't play bass well. Just kidding.
Well, and I've had an ongoing conversation with one of our mutual editor friends about the idea that, in my opinion, a lot of bass players become producers, because I think they do tend to zoom out a little bit and see the big picture of the whole track, more so than, for example, some guitar players who are more focused on, I need to play this part here, you know, and so there is that. But to your point, I think it's a really interesting perspective to say that, yeah, we don't have too much technology. What we have is almost a jaded outlook on that technology, rather than, you know, you've been called by a number of people the world's oldest kid, because you do have still this curiosity.
The world's oldest living techno guitarist.
There you go, yeah. But you know, I do think it's a quality that people should be encouraged to cultivate, especially, I mean, we're in a creative endeavor, you know, so the idea of approaching that technology the same way and saying, you know, what if, how can I do something new and different with all of this stuff, rather than, yeah, you know, I got this plug-in and I'm going to use it because so-and-so used it on this, you know. It's the idea of always wanting to accomplish something new, to create something new. Isn't that what art's all about?
There was a very interesting study, I don't know if you heard about this, that was done in Barcelona, that analyzed, I think, God, it was like millions of songs, it was like 250 gigabytes of songs since 1955. And they came to the conclusion that over the years, chord progressions had become less interesting, melodies had become less interesting, recording techniques had become more homogenized, mastering was obviously, you know, just done the same way. And I wrote about that for my second editorial for Mix. You know, I'm on the back page of Mix now. So I wrote about that, and I said, we can't talk about whether music is good or bad, because that's totally subjective, but we can talk about whether it's more inbred. And every time you dial up a mini Moog bass patch, you're contributing to that narrowing. You're making music more inbred, instead of saying, what happens if I take a clavinet and drop it down 2 octaves, which makes a fabulous bass sound?
Yeah.
You know? So the other thing about that is so I went back and I was listening to like nuggets from the psychedelic era, that album, because I've been getting a lot of interviews lately, and people have been asking me about the 60s, and I've been sort of getting back to my roots, going, yeah, what was it like?
And you remember them too.
Oh, I remember them. But I've also been doing some music that was sort of channeling that inner 60s thing. But I listened to some of that older stuff, some of the, you know, like the garage bands, and I don't mean the Apple thing, I mean the bands of that time. And they all had a very similar instrumentation. They all had a guitar, you know, they were all playing through a Fender amp that had a spring reverb, and they had a combo organ of some type. And yet the level of musical adventurousness was way huge compared to what we're doing now.
Sure.
And I'm not saying it was better, but I'm saying that they had this limited palette, and it was like, okay, what can we do? Even though they were all using like a combo organ because they couldn't afford to lug a Hammond around, they, some used the 4-foot stop and the 8-foot, and some had a Farfisa, and some had a Vox Continental or whatever, and they really tried to do things different, to do double time stuff, strange studio thing. Oh, what if I take this guitar and and I'm not saying that, oh, those were the days, man, things were better then. I'm just saying that necessity forced people to like think along other lines, whereas today it's like a lot of people want to recreate a certain hit sound. Oh, I want to be successful. They don't think of music as a personal exploration, but as a way to make a living, and that's fine.
Commodity, yeah.
I think you should make a living, but it's not. I hate it when they talk about, well, the way people consume music these days. It's like, well, consume? I mean, what are we talking about here?
Well, and that's just it. That makes it into, more or less it makes it a transactional kind of thing as opposed to a creative thing. And, to your point, had a great conversation a few months back with a producer named Shel Talmy.
Oh yeah, he worked
know.
on. He was involved in our third album.
I love it.
Over in England.
Really? Yeah. And one of the things that Shel really fascinated me with was the idea that, he started out in a studio that had a 3-track, and they were thrilled because they had that third track, and it was all a matter of, okay, where do I place people? We talk a lot about Al Schmidt, who just recently passed, and one of Al's absolute brilliance was the idea of, all I'm going to do is move this microphone just, a 1/4 inch over here, and it's going to change the entire tonality. And when you have this limited palette of tools to work with, you have to be more improvisational with how you experiment, how you ask that question of what if.
Well, and the other thing is that I see people getting much more rigid about everything. They become very like, well, Pro Tools killed music. It's like, no, DAWs don't kill music, people kill music.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the other one is like, well, Melodyne takes all the life out of everything. And it's like, no, because if it's done right, you don't know that it was even done.
Yeah.
If it's done wrong, then you can hear it and so you get upset. But
now it's a big gimmick.
But I say Melodyne lets you do vocals with more soul, and the reason why is because you can stretch, you can go crazy with your voice or whatever, and if you do this fabulous take, but there's like 2 notes that are wrong, you can fix them instead of like sitting there and making sure you don't do those 2 wrong notes.
Right, and trying to recreate the whole thing again, or trying to punch in and all of that, and that's part of the point too. Is we've both been through sessions where we've worked so hard to comp something or to kind of cobble something together out of various parts, and a lot of times you can fool people, but I think especially if you were there, you're always going to know, okay, that wasn't the real part right there, and this is about capturing magic. It really is. It's lightning in a bottle, as they say, and I think to me, the idea of being able to capture that as bare bones as possible, there's an art form to that too.
I do as much one-take stuff as possible, and not because I think that there's special magic, but because it has continuity. And so, like, if you're trying to tell a story, I mean, music is about communication, and to me, I'm a storyteller in the music, and the story works much better if it's coming off like a conversation like we're having now, instead of like, hey Daniel, like my guitar is like, really, I like the way it sounds. It's just I mean, I said the same thing, but it lacks continuity.
Sure, it does. It's kind of like, sending someone a text and then 3 days later they respond, and you no longer have that thread, and that I think is really the mark of a great producer. And this is one of the things that I've always really been fascinated with, being able to watch a producer in the studio, someone who can really capture that moment and keep not just the artist, but everybody and everything focused on capturing that entire story. And, because as you say, it's lyrically, for example, there's a story that's being told linearly, but musically too.
But there's another factor that really makes a difference these days, which is that people can do things themselves. Now, if you think about it, when Buddy Holly was recording, or the Beatles or whatever, If you think about the left brain, right brain differences and the dichotomies and all that. So when Buddy Holly was recording, he didn't have to lap the heads. He didn't have to look at the VU meters. He didn't have to do anything. The engineer took care of all the left brain stuff. The artist could live in the right brain the whole time. It was the job of the producer to live in both worlds and integrate them, you know, and that's why producers have a bigger corpus callosum and get a higher percentage, get more points, you know, and that's true, by the way. That is true, by the way. Musicians having more developed neural pathway between the left and right brains. Now that's a kind of an oversimplification, you know, but it makes sense. But it's. I mean, there was a Nobel Prize given for the original research. Now the years have shown that there are nuances to that, but nonetheless, there's still there is that difference. There is that difference, and the way I explain it to people is, I said, look, it's like your left brain is the MS-DOS side, and your right brain is the GUI. You know, I mean, that's really the difference, and you need both. You know, so I think that's being. I don't know if solo artists know enough or think enough about putting themselves in different spaces as they do things. Like, one of the things I always advise people to do is, your DAW can color code things. Use color. Your brain can parse color much faster than it can parse text. So when you have a scribble strip on the bottom, I mean, like, all my guitar parts are always blue. All my vocals are green. My drums are always, you know, so where's the guitar? Right there, you know, and I'll change the saturation on it if it's a lead that needs work or something like that, so I can always, like, find it. And the other thing is keyboard shortcuts, you know, things like that. Sure. And I can really see that in the future that speech recognition can make a huge difference. Because if I say, insert a stereo audio track in between tracks 3 and 4, as opposed to insert track, specify number of tracks, audio or MIDI, audio, where do you want it? You know, I mean, there's a lot of, and
it pulls you out of the creative process. It pulls you into the left brain to do that and then get back into
and it's hard to switch back. The example I always give in seminars is, you've got some great idea, the phone rings and you have to deal with something, and then you go back and it's not there anymore. And that's also that continuity. When you can stay in your right brain and stay in that level of continuity, it just makes it just makes a big difference.
It's true.
You know?
It's true.
So I think that this is something, you know, if anybody listens to this and wants to have a takeaway number one is, ask what if instead of how do I. And the other one is, learn to be able to put yourself in these different roles. Don't edit while you're recording. Don't produce yourself when you're recording.
Not just put yourself in those roles, but I think, to your point, learn how to find separation between those roles and be able to transition from one to the other, because that's the challenge.
And learn to be brutal about your music, you know, as a producer. Like, you know, oh, wow, that's a great guitar solo. Does it support the vocal? I mean, one thing I always tell everybody is, like, look, no matter what we play, no matter what we want to think, all that matters is the vocal. Everything everything we do is to support the vocal.
It's a total work. My first recording teacher said something to the class the first day that has held true, which is, he said, after you're done with this course, you're never going to be able to listen to music the same way again. Because we tend to, once we've had any kind of experience in the recording process, we tend to break things apart and analyze them. And what we don't keep in mind a lot of times is that the average listener is not going to do that. They're going to hear the whole thing as a work. You know, it's like when you hear a lot of these Beatles remixes and, you know, the isolated parts and everything, and you realize, wow, a lot of individual little components went into that, but ultimately it turns into Strawberry Fields or whatever it is. You know, it's a total work, and you don't go in there intentionally, or, well, normal people, not people like us, but normal people don't go in there and intentionally listen to Ringo's snare pattern,
right?
Or, you know, George Harrison's rhythm guitar. All of that stuff is really, it's a part of the whole. And we tend to forget that, I think.
Well, you know, I do a lot of video work, and that changed how I look at movies. I have to see movies twice. I have to see it once to just let it wash over me and be a movie. But the rest of the time I'm listening to it, you know, and I'm being amazed by, you know, like, wow, the way that they brought in that sound effect into the chat. Mad Max Fury Road.
That's
the sound on that is just, you know, like, it took me a while to actually watch the movie because there was just so much going on.
Cinematography too, you know, one of the classic examples is Clockwork Orange. You know, it's a bizarre movie no matter what, But then when you start looking at the things that he did with the cinematography, where he'll just suddenly cut to this, from this dull sort of night scene to this bright, stark image. There's another really great movie that not a lot of people are familiar with. It's a French movie called Diva. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but again, just the storytelling itself is brilliant, but the second time you watch it and you start realizing, wow, he just cut to this great scene where this limo is driving towards this lighthouse and you've got this one-point perspective happening, and it's
framing.
It's framing, it's context, it's how you use that in correlation with the soundtrack and everything else. That's all stuff that is going to strike the viewer, the consumer, if you will, of the art as a whole package.
And this actually brings up something else that I think is really important, which is interdisciplinary stuff. Like, my music has gotten better since I worked with video. My video has gotten better since I worked with music. I play multiple instruments, not because I'm cool, but because I play different things on different instruments. Like, for example, I play a really good blues harmonica. I mean, a really good blues harmonica.
Oh, I have to hear that sometime.
And I'm doing it more and more. I put it through an amp, and it's like, and I love doing it. And there was one album where I was doing a Windows update, and I had a ukulele sitting around that was given to me by a company like years ago, and I never played it. It's a ukulele, right? So I'm sitting around, I'm waiting for this like 3 gigabyte update on my, crappy AT&T DSL or whatever. And so I pick up the ukulele and I start playing it. I'm going, wow, this is kind of cool. And it became the foundation of my 2017 album project. It was like, had a lot of ukulele in it, and that put it in a different direction. It had more acoustic guitars, it had more hand percussion, and I also learned how to mic and process a ukulele, so it sounded like this really cool kind of ethnic nylon string instrument and stuff. And that influenced the songs. That influenced how I did the songs. I have big fingers, it has little frets, I did the simple chords,
Sure.
And then learning keyboards was incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. Same here, as a guitar player, learning keyboards got me writing differently than I would have written on the guitar.
I did one album project, this was back in the 86, I guess. It was called Forward Motion. It did pretty good, but this was before inexpensive digital audio. So all the guitar parts were MIDI guitar. And so, of course, being a technology person, people say, oh, which is the MIDI guitar and which is the keyboard? And I said, well, if it sounds like I'm playing guitar, it's probably the keyboard. And if it sounds like I'm playing keyboard, it's probably the guitar. They kind of crossed over like that. And when I play keyboard, like I don't use the mod wheel to add vibrato. I do it with the pitch bend wheel because that's sort of the way that I do it. And then the mod wheel can do other fun things, and foot pedals and stuff like that. So I think the more things you learn, my goal in life is not to be a great keyboard player. I mean, I'm not a great keyboard player. I can fake it with MIDI, but it makes me think differently and it puts my brain in a different direction.
Yes.
So, anything you can do to broaden your horizons, different types of music. I love zouk and soca. I love Caribbean music. I listen to a lot of Afro pop. I listen to a lot of everything, And people say, oh yeah, I like all kinds of music, but I really do like all kinds of music, and I'm influenced by them all. I can't help it, and I want to be.
Well, and take that a step further and extend that to your career, because I find that this is, it's the case for you, it's the case for me and a lot of other people, especially in our creative industry, where, as you say, the video comes in, it influences your music. Everything that we do, because we're all very multifaceted and self-taught at a lot of things, everything we do influences everything else we do in these kind of, a lot of times very unexpected and oddball sort of ways, And that, I think, is part of the creative process too, because we're not one-dimensional, The idea that I'm just a guitar player. No, you're not just a guitar player. You're a guitar player, but you're also, you have technical interests. You might play keyboards because you just wanted to get this one part. But all of that plays into who we are as a package.
Well, yeah, and I'd add something else to that, which is, I've always backed into everything. stand back and see what comes my way, because you get the weirdest
Yes.
connections.
Yes.
I got to tell you, so like, very few people really know how my whole career started in terms of what I'm doing now. But it all started because the editor of Popular Electronics was killed in a car crash. And he was a great guy. He loved my music articles. And Oliver P. Farrell, yeah, great guy. And I was really like devastated when he died, but I was even more devastated because they were paying real money back in those days for magazine articles. I was getting like $600 to $1,000, which now would be like, $4,000 or something. And the new editor didn't want any music stuff. So all of a sudden I was like broke, basically. And so I went to a newsstand, I looked around, oh, Guitar Player, there's a magazine. So I pitched Guitar Player on doing a headphone amp. And they were like, no, somebody will electrocute themselves and we'll get sued. And we did an amp modification and we're never gonna do that again, And I'm like, no, it's just batteries, it's okay. But they were very resistant about it. So but I was insistent. So they went to Alembic and they said, look, this kid's like wants us to do a headphone amp. Do you think this thing will fly? And they said, oh yeah, that'll work, that's fine. So they accepted the article. So I gave them the schematic and they said, well, we do our own artwork here. Thanks for the schematic, but we need to do it in our look. And I said, it's a schematic, you can't make any mistakes.
Can I make a cartoon with it?
Well, they made a mistake.
Ooh.
They made a mistake. So the thing couldn't work. I mean, it literally couldn't work. It was the best thing that ever happened to me because I got over 300 letters from people. And they varied all the way from like, I don't know, this isn't working for me, to, hey, I know how these things work and you're missing the ground line there, to, I'm the audio semiconductor engineer at National Semiconductor and I'm here using our chip and, pin 2 has to like go to ground and, or whatever.
Uh-huh.
So at that point, Guitar Player was like, oh, maybe there's something in this. So they had me do another article, and that was like a treble booster, kind of a Brian May-ish sort of thing. And people really liked that. So they said, why don't you write a book? And I'm like, okay. And at this time, I was dirt poor. I just moved I just finished all my sessions work in New York. I moved out to California. And so it's like, okay, I'll write a book. So about a month later, they call me up and, well, how's the book going? How's the book going along? I hadn't done anything. I'm like, how do you write a book? I don't know. And so they say, well, can you send us an out? And I didn't say that. I just said, oh, yeah. Book, yeah, right. Squirrel,
But that's the basis of all of our careers, isn't it? Can you do this? Yeah, sure.
But then,
yikes.
But then they said, well, send us an outline. And all of a sudden the light went on. Outline, that's how the pros do it. They write an outline. So I had this book called How to Keep Your Volkswagen Alive, which taught me how to make a car work. I knew nothing about cars. So I just followed the format for that of like, well, if this can teach me about cars, then this can teach people about electronics. And then I hooked up with Bill Godbout at Godbout Electronics. We did the parts kits for it. And I became a pretty good, analog circuit designer because I'd been working on analog circuit designs. And then that led to doing home recording for musicians, which led to having George Martin write the foreword, which led to. So there are all these connections, And then you never know what's going to come in handy. Like for some reason, I've ended up doing quite a few classical projects.
Uh-huh.
And I did a classical project with a harpsichord player. And she's like, this tall, and she's like old, and she plays the harpsichord like Bach came over that day and said, hey, Kathy, I got this great harpsichord piece, Uh-huh. And she doesn't do it as a museum piece. It comes alive with the way she does it. So I was going to mic her, the usual XY harpsichord tinkly thing. And I said, hey, Kathy, do you mind if I try different miking techniques? So I close mic'd it. I mic'd it like a rock and roll piano, basically. I did it both ways. I played both ways for her. I didn't tell her which was which. I said, which way do you want this to sound? Without a microsecond of hesitation, she picked the rock and roll miking. She said, that's what a harpsichord sounds like. Now, I know how to mic a rock and roll piano, and it served me very well with a classical project. Mm-hmm. And it got a really good response. And I guarantee that the people who listened to it didn't think, oh, he must have mic'd it differently.
Because they don't care. That's just
They just want to hear it.
Yeah.
It sounded almost like some weird FM synthesizer. It had that whole metallic quality of a harpsichord,
Well, but it's interesting how you say, you basically, we bring all of these different facets and different talents and different experiences to everything we do. Mm-hmm. And there's this great Kurt Vonnegut quote where he talks about when he was a young teenager, he went to work at he went to a summer camp, and one of the counselors there was asking him, well, what do you do? Do you play sports? And he said, no, I'm in the choir and I'm in the band and I do this and I do that. And the counselor said to him, "Oh, that's fantastic." And he said, "No, I'm not really very good at any of them." And he said, the thing that the guy said next really changed my life, because he said, "It's not that you're really good at one thing. It's that you gain all of these different experiences." And I think for most of us, that's really the basis of it, is we take every single little experience that we've got and we bring it into the sum total of what we're doing now. That's a career.
I told my kid, I said, you can find anything I do, you can find somebody who does it better.
Absolutely.
Anything I do, but you can't find anybody who does all of them, One of the terms I use a lot to describe this is I'm always looking for models of how things work. And there are quite a few people I know who, excuse me, independently came up with what they call the Craig Anderton model of a career, because I do have a certain model. And it's like with these, with these books I'm doing with Sweetwater. It's like, it's a different model of how to get information out. Mm-hmm. It's treating it like software instead of print, and it's an entirely different model with updates and all that. So I'm always looking for what's a model that's going to work, that's going to be different, that's going to be a slot that no one else has. Because the best slot you can find is something that's underserved, yes, but for which there's a great demand.
Yes.
And whether that's rock and roll engineers who do harpsichords, or whether that's a computer guy teaching with a different model. That's what makes things unique, and that's also, again, that also brings you back to the what if. What if I don't do things the way things have been done? It's like with streaming. I mean, look who you're competing with. You're competing with every piece of music that's been recorded. And the other thing that people tend to forget is that music never existed as anything other than a transitory of the moment experience until about 120 years ago.
Yes.
We have sculptures, we have art, we have stone tablets, we have paintings, we have cave paintings that still exist, but nobody knows what music sounded like until we were able to record it. And to me, it's that transitory of the moment ethereal nature of music that people have tended to forget about with recording. The object of recording, when I was coming up in this, the object of recording was to capture the magic of a live performance. Now, people look at a live performance as a way to duplicate what's on the recording. And I think that's in the wrong direction.
It's true.
I definitely would like to see more live performance happening.
Well, and corollary to that is the idea that all of these other forms of art, you don't get this immediate feedback that you do with a live performance. An artist creates a work of art and then puts it out there. And then, the feedback comes in little by little over centuries, exactly. And, the same thing is true with a recording to a certain extent. And yet the live performance, it's ethereal. It's here and then it's gone. And that response that you get from your audience is what you're going to get. That's it. You're not going to get people later on going, "Hey, that thing you did last week, man."
Yeah, right. Well, too, the one thing about that is, again, back in the day, when people talk about these classic albums of the 50s, 60s, 70s, or whatever, they think, oh, it must have been two preamps, or it must have been tape, or it must have been this. No, it's that these bands didn't go into the studio until they'd been on the road for 6 months to a year. They'd honed their act. They threw out the songs where people threw tomatoes at them, and they had it down to like where they could go into the studio. And people nowadays are like, wow, they recorded that album in like 2 days. And it's like, well, they did a concert in 2 hours, so think how many takes they got to do. I think that a live performance is the purest form of music. I mean, it's great that you can capture it. But there's still a debate about whether in Bach concertos, whether the notes were swung a little bit. Uh-huh. It wasn't dun 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 dun. It was dun 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 dun. Yeah. And there's a pretty convincing argument that that's the way it was intended, but it was just the fashion of the day, so it wasn't written down that way. It was just that's the way you did it,
Well, we couldn't record it and capture it.
So we have no idea.
Yeah.
We have no idea, but that's the other thing. I mean, even when music was first recorded, it was kind of disposable. 45s didn't last forever. Cassettes self-destructed. 8-track tapes, became roadkill, or whatever. It's always been ephemeral, and it's a little bit weird that today, if you want to get into music, everything that's ever been recorded is available at the click of a mouse. It used to be record companies would say, get me the next Springsteen, give me the next Prince, give me the next Michael Jackson. Well, they're already there. And the competition for the band down the street isn't the other band down the street. It's what people can listen to on YouTube. You know, it's classic stuff. So now you really do have to be different. And being different might just be sitting down with an acoustic guitar and joking with the audience, because they're not going to get that from YouTube.
Yeah.
You know? So, I mean, I think there's a lot of options. I've been thinking actually of putting together a set for Halloween, and it would be called The Deadful Great, and it would be nothing but songs by dead rock stars. And it would be a combination of humor and music and reverence, you know, for like some of this great stuff. But I think that's something you're not going to get on YouTube. That's going to be something different. It's going to be something people will talk about, you know? And I think that there's a lot of opportunities. You just have to ask what if, you know, what if I put together a set, you know?
So let's wrap this up with bringing that thought around, because you and I both work with a lot of students, a lot of younger people coming up who are obviously, first of all, growing up in a completely different world, with completely different technologies at our disposal and a completely different music industry. And
such as it is.
yeah, exactly. But one of the things that I've always been fascinated by is the idea that you can still do unique things. You just have to be open to following that path and allowing all these things to sort of percolate. You're an educator too. What kind of advice would you give someone wanting to get into this industry today, employing that what if philosophy?
Okay. A lot of people want to get into music because they think they can make a living at it. They can't. They won't. It'll never happen. Period. Music is about self-discovery. Music will provide benefits that they can't even think about. You know, it's huge. But what they can do is they can make a living based around music. And I've proven that, because everything I do involves music and musical technology, but I haven't played live significantly like since the early 2000s, okay? When I was doing like DJ stuff. And then of course now we have a pandemic and all that. But I write about it, I do presets, I do samples, I teach about it, I learn things, I write blog posts, you know, and the whole thing is being fueled by music. To me, music is R&D for the rest of my career, you know? And I put it out there, and people like it, but I don't care whether people like it or not, because I'm doing it for me. I'm doing it because I love it. I'm doing it because every time I hear playback, I learn something about myself. And the one thing I tell people is, look, always be true to yourself. Always be true to yourself. And here's why. There's a practical reason why. This isn't just a philosophical thing. The practical reason is that if what you do resonates with people, and thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people stream your stuff, you're set, because you don't have to fake it. You're not the result of a focus group. You're not the result of like music by committee. Oh, this was a hit, so we'll do it this way. But it's a very rare thing that your music will resonate with huge numbers of people. But your music will resonate with some group of people. There will be some group of people who have a similar mindset and similar interests, and they will listen to your music and they will love it. So I think I have like 1,600 subscribers to my YouTube channel, and I don't push it, I don't promote it. But those people, I've found 1,600 people who like to listen to my music, and that's good enough. You know, that's good enough.
But for you, the music is also, as you say, it's proof of concept. Isn't it?
It's
the fuel with which you feed all of these other, sort of ancillary.
Well, and most of the songs happen by accident. I'm trying out something like, I want to try out this new plug-in here, and I'm playing guitar, and it's like,
that's kind of cool.
Record, you know, or like that story about the ukulele.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
Or where a harmonica takes you or whatever. So music is a magical, wonderful thing that is, it changes our brains, it changes our lives, it changes the way we look at the world, it keeps us young. I mean, it's got to keep us young, or Keith Richards would have been dead years ago, right? So, I mean, it really does keep you young. It really does. And so there are so many reasons to get into music that have nothing to do with like making it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Thanks. Craig Anderton, thank you for being my guest.
Hey, my pleasure. Anytime.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.